Have you ever felt a profound, unsettling certainty that you were in a place you were never meant to see? Not just a forbidden room, but a location that seems to reject your very presence, where the silence isn't empty but watchful. This sensation, a primal whisper in the back of your mind, is more than paranoia. It is a recognition of a truth buried by layers of official documents and deliberate forgetting. My story begins with such a feeling, born from a job offer that seemed tailor-made to rescue me from my crumbling life. It promised isolation, purpose, and a salary that felt like a miracle. What it delivered was a burden of secrets so vast and so terrible that it redefined my understanding of our world of history and of the very nature of what is meant by contact. I was hired not as a warden, but as a witness to a crime scene spanning decades, a keeper of the gate for things that were patiently, methodically planning their way home to my name is Elias Vance. For nearly a decade, I served as a federal park ranger in some of the most remote and beautiful landscapes in the American West. I didn't leave that life. It left me. The departure wasn't marked by a single event, but by a slow, corrosive erosion. A persistent dread would coil in my stomach during solo patrols through dense fog or deep forest, a feeling of being stalked by nothing at all. The anxiety attacks started as tightness in my chest, escalating until I had to pull my vehicle over, gasping, convinced the towering pines were closing in. My marriage had dissolved 2 years prior, a quiet casualty of my increasing detachment and unexplained moods. My daughter, Lila, her voice once the brightest sound in my world, now spoke to me in clipped, formal tones, if she answered my calls at all. At 38, I was a ghost in my own life, drifting through temporary security gigs and warehouse work, each paycheck a frantic calculation against rent and debt. Hope was a luxury I could no longer afford. Then, on a rain-slicked Thursday evening in a dim public library, I found it, or perhaps it found me. The job listing was buried in a subdirectory of a federal employment portal, so obscure it felt archaeological. The header was plain text, asterisk, custodial superintendent, Sector Gamma. Asterisk, the description was a masterpiece of enticing vagueness. It sought a single individual for a long-term residential posting at a decommissioned environmental research station. The requirements were a bizarre mirror of my failings. Must possess high tolerance for profound isolation, ability to adhere to strict procedural protocols without deviation, previous experience with operational stress management preferred, and then the figure. An annual salary that was triple my last government wage, with a completion bonus that could erase all my debts and start a new life. It felt less like an opportunity, and more like a life raft thrown to a drowning man. I sent my application into the digital void, a gesture of pure desperation. The response was unervingly swift. My phone rang at precisely 8:06 the next morning. The voice on the other end was a woman's, cool and measured, each word enunciated with sterile precision. Mr. Vance, this is Administrator Sylvia Reed of the Geospatial Oversight Directorate. We have reviewed your application. Your psychological and professional profiles present a unique alignment with our needs. She paused, and I could hear the faint hum of a climate-controlled room. Your evaluations indicate a cognitive tendency to process complex or stressful situations through segmentation. You break large, unsettling problems into small, manageable tasks. This is not a common trait. It is, for this role, the essential trait. I should have questioned her. I should have demanded to know why breaking down horror was a job qualification. Instead, I heard the ghost of my daughter's tuition and the specter of my empty bank account. I remained silent. She proceeded. The posting was at a place called the Blacklock Research Preserve, a tract of land in the high desert of eastern Oregon, withdrawn from public use by executive order in 1988. My duties would be straightforward: maintain the perimeter integrity, monitor automated security and environmental systems, and file daily digital reports. The site is fully automated, Reed explained. Your presence is a redundancy, a human failsafe. What am I safeguarding against? I asked, the question feeling foolish even as I said it. This time, the silence was protracted. The environment is dynamic, Mr. Vance. Seismic activity, wildlife intrusion, atmospheric electrical disturbances. The systems are sensitive. They log everything. Your task is to verify that the logs are accurate and report any anomalies. Anomalies? Patterns that fall outside established environmental parameters. You'll be trained to recognize them. Her tone made it clear the conversation was veering into a need-to-know territory for which I did not yet qualify. The ensuing 3 weeks were a blur of deep background checks, physical examinations, and a battery of psychological tests so intrusive they felt like a psychic strip search. I was summoned to a nondescript office complex in a suburb of Denver. The building had the timeless, faded quality of Cold War bureaucracy. It was there I met Sylvia Reed in person. She was a woman in her late 50s, with hair the color of steel wool and eyes that were pale, sharp, and devoid of warmth. She assessed me not as a person, but as a component, checking for flaws. Without ceremony, she presented a contract. It was a dense forest of legalistic jargon, but certain phrases stood out in stark relief. Indefinite confidentiality obligation, property of the state, non-negotiable term of service, 36 months. My pen hovered over the signature line. Reed watched, unblinking. "You should be aware, Elias," she said, using my first name for first time, and it sounded like a clinical term. "This is not a standard rotation. It is a total immersion posting. You will live on site. All provisions are supplied. A quarterly resupply convoy will visit. You will conduct a secured video briefing every Sunday. You are the sole human occupant." She leaned forward slightly, and the overhead light caught the lenses of her glasses, turning them opaque. The commitment once made is absolute. Early termination is not an option. It constitutes a material breach with significant non-judicial consequences. Do you understand? I understood that I had run out of roads. I signed. They gave me 48 hours. I sold or stored the pathetic remnants of my old life. A few boxes of books, some photographs I couldn't bear to look at, Lila's childhood drawings folded carefully away. Everything else fit into the bed of the provided, government-issue pickup truck. The drive west was a journey into emptiness. The interstate gave way to state highways. Then the county roads cracked and patched like old pottery. Finally, I turned onto a gravel track that seemed to lead off the edge of the map. A rusted metal sign, pockmarked by bullets, marked the transition, asterisk restricted area, and no unauthorized access, use of deadly force authorized. For 20 miles, the legal code, I saw nothing but one I'd never heard of. Occasional, startled antelope. The road climbed steadily, the air growing thin and cold. Just as I began to suspect a catastrophic error, I saw the checkpoint. It was a monolithic structure of reinforced concrete and one-way glass, a brutalist pillbox sunk into the landscape. A single barrier arm blocked the road. As I rolled to stop, a figure emerged. He was a man of indeterminate age, wearing a faded uniform that might have once been Forest Service issue. His face was a road map of deep lines and weathered skin, his eyes sunken and hollow. His name tag read Carson. "Vance," he stated. It wasn't a question. He looked past me, toward the horizon, as if my arrival was a minor, irritating detail in a far more important timeline. "I'm done here. You're the relief." He gestured with a jerk of his chin toward the barrier, which began to rise with a hydraulic whine. "Follow the road. 10 miles. Don't stop. Don't get out. The station will be unlocked." Without another word, he turned and walked to a dust-caked SUV, starting the engine before his door was closed. He executed a tight turn and sped back the way I had come, leaving me in a cloud of alkaline dust. I was alone. The silence was immense. I drove forward, the truck bouncing on the rutted track as it wound through a narrow, rocky pass. And then the land fell away. Blacklot Preserve unfolded below me, a vast and startling wound in the earth. It was a perfect geological bowl, perhaps 12 miles in diameter, encircled by sheer rust-colored cliffs. The basin floor was a monochrome tapestry of pale, cracked clay and ash-gray sediment, utterly devoid of life. No sagebrush, no juniper, not a single blade of hardy desert grass. Scattered across this dead plain were the remnants of human endeavor. The broken teeth of concrete foundations, the twisted skeletons of galvanized steel framing, low, half-buried bunkers with heavy, rust-stained doors. It looked like the aftermath of a bombardment from another era. But dominating the scene, surrounding the entire inner circumference of the basin, was a fence. It was a construct of terrifying intent. 15 feet of heavy-gauge chain link, topped with outward curling panels of razor wire that glittered wickedly in the harsh sunlight. It was pristine, conspicuously new against the ancient decay it enclosed. At regular intervals, thick support posts held arrays of sophisticated equipment. Compact sensor housings, high-resolution cameras with complex lenses, and other devices I couldn't identify, some resembling acoustic dishes, others like sleek, black panels that seemed to absorb the light. My heart hammered against my ribs. This wasn't a preserve. This was a containment zone. The road descended in a tight spiral to the basin floor, ending at a cluster of 3 low-slung, windowless buildings made of the same buff-colored concrete as the cliffs, designed to blend and endure. This was Station Gamma. The main door was unlocked, as Carson had said. Inside, the air was cool, dry, and smelled of concrete dust and ozone. The space was divided into a Spartan living quarter, a cot, a small kitchenette, a utilitarian bathroom, and the operational heart, the watch room. One entire wall was a single, seamless bank of monitors, currently dark. Beneath it sat a console worthy of a nuclear power plant, studded with switches, status lights, and a microphone for a radio system. A single, ergonomic chair was bolted to the floor. On the console lay a single item, a thick leather-bound ledger, its cover worn smooth. I opened it. The pages were filled with dense, meticulous handwriting, entries dating back months, times, coordinates, sensor codes, and brief notes. Event 034-87. Trigger. Probable cause, wind. Event 112-09. Trigger. Probable cause, unknown. The word unknown appeared with chilling frequency. I had just settled the ledger back when the main monitors flickered to life with a soft hum, displaying 16 different views of the basin. The clarity was military grade. I could see individual rocks, the textured clay, the way dust devil spun lazily across the open ground. A schematic map overlay on a secondary screen showed the entire basin as a green grid, dotted with hundreds of tiny numbered nodes. The sensor array. A sudden, loud crackle made me jump. The radio speaker on the console came alive. Station Gamma. This is Central Oversight. Initiate Day 1 systems check. Confirm receipt. I fumble for the microphone. Station Gamma. Receipt confirmed. Systems are coming online now. Acknowledged, Vance. It was Reed's voice. Your predecessor's final log has been uploaded. Review it. Your primary directive is continuity of observation. The automated systems function independently. You are the auditor. You will log every sensor trigger in the physical ledger. Every one. No exceptions. At 1800 hours daily, you will file a digital summary via the secure terminal. Your first perimeter inspection is scheduled for tomorrow, 0900 hours. A route map is loaded into the console. Do not deviate. Understood. I paused. Administrator Reed, what am I looking for out there? The pause was deliberate. You are looking for discrepancies, Vance. You are verifying that the machines see what they're supposed to see. The environment here is electrically active. It generates phantom signals, thermal mirages. Your role is to apply human judgment to filter the noise, to identify the signals that are not noise. Has there ever been a real breach? A physical incursion? The line was silent for so long, I thought the connection had dropped. The perimeter has never been compromised, she said finally, her voice flat. Your concern is procedural fidelity, not speculative security. The protocols are your priority. They are detailed in the manual on your console. Study them. The radio went dead. I found a manual, a slim laminated binder. The Gamma Station protocols were a list of star commandments. 1. The perimeter fence is not to be touched, altered, or approached within 10 feet except during authorized maintenance. 2. No interior structure, bunker, or artifact within the basin is to be entered or physically examined. 3. Sensor triggers in grid sectors 7 through 12, designated the Eastern Quadrant, are to be logged with the code YENVIENOM and reported verbatim. No independent investigation is authorized. 4. No external communication is permitted outside the designated daily and emergency channels. 5. Station Gamma is not to be vacated between the hours of sunset and sunrise under any circumstances. The specificity of rule. 3 coiled in my gut like cold lead. The eastern quadrant. I pulled up the map. It covered roughly a third of the basin's eastern side, an area where the bunkers were most densely clustered. I cross-referenced Carson's ledger. Nearly 80% of the unknown triggers were in that sector. The afternoon sun began its descent, casting long, distorted shadows from the derelict structures. I performed my first systems check, confirming each camera feed and sensor node was active. The routine was mindless, mechanical. It was a kind of compartmentalized task my psyche was built for, and for a few hours, the crushing weirdness of my situation receded. At 1800 sharp, I filed my first report. All systems nominal. No activity. The act felt absurd. Night in the high desert fell with the finality of a curtain drop. With no light pollution, the blackness was absolute, pressing against the station's small, reinforced porthole windows. I kept the watchroom lights off, the glow of the monitors painting my face in pale blue. The silence was different now. Deeper, heavier, a physical presence in the room. Then, at 2,147 hours, the first alert chimed. A soft, melodic ping. On the schematic map, a node in the heart of the eastern quadrant. Sensor 7 Alpha flashed red. I jumped, my breath catching. I pulled up the corresponding camera feed. The night vision image was a grainy panorama of grays and greens, showing a stretch of empty ground and the distant, dark hump of a bunker. Nothing moved, and MY hands trembled slightly as I opened the ledger, found the next blank line, and wrote, 2147, Sensor 7 Alpha, Grid E7, Cause unknown. I keyed the radio. Central Oversight, Station Gamma. Sensor Trigger, Grid E7, Sensor 7 Alpha. Logged as unknown. The reply was instantaneous, as if Reed had been waiting. Acknowledge Gamma. Log and continue monitoring. No action required. Before I could respond, another ping, then another. Sensor 7 Beta. Sensor 7 Gamma. A cascade of red lights bloomed across the eastern sector of the map, moving in a swift, coherent line from south to north, tracing the interior of the fence. They weren't random. This was a patrol. Central, multiple triggers now. Sector E7, sequential movement. Pattern is non-random. Log Gamma. Environmental anomaly pattern is consistent. Maintain observation. Environmental anomaly. The phrase was a stone in my shoe. I watched, mesmerized, as the line of red dots continued its methodical sweep. On the camera feeds, I saw nothing but static and shadow. But the sensors, they were tracking something that knew the layout, that moved with purpose. The activity persisted for precisely 48 minutes, then ceased as abruptly as it began. The map returned to its calm, green state. The silence rushed back in, now freighted with terrible new knowledge. The phantom signals had a schedule. They had intent. Sleep was impossible. I sat in the chair, staring at the dark monitors, Carson's hollow eyes haunting my memory. He hadn't looked like a man relieved to be going home. He looked like a man escaping a tomb. At 0300, a new alert, different, a sharper, urgent tone. A single red dot flashed, not in the east, but much closer. Sensor 2 Charlie. The northern perimeter, less than 500 yards from my station. My blood went cold. I called up the camera. The feed was dark, then adjusted. And there, at the very edge of the frame, caught in the faint ambient glow of a status light on a fence post, was a shape. It was low to the ground, pale against the dark earth. It wasn't walking. It was flowing, a liquid movement that defied articulation. It stopped perfectly still, and though it had no discernible face, no eyes I could see, I felt with every screaming neuron in my brain that it was turned toward the camera. Toward me, it was looking back. The shape held its position for what felt like an eternity, a still life of wrongness against a static landscape. My hand was frozen on the microphone. The call to central oversight lodged in my throat. A primal part of my brain, the part that recognized predators in the dark, screamed that breaking this silence would be a fatal mistake. Then, with that same unsettling fluidity, it pivoted, not a turn, but a seamless reorientation of its entire form, and moved away, disappearing beyond the camera's range in seconds. The sensor light on the map winked out. I sat there, breathing ragged, the stereo hum of the server racks the only sound. Reed's voice echoed in my head. Environmental anomaly. Phantom signals. That was no mirage. That was a presence. It had come to look at the new tenant, forcing air into my lungs. I reached for the radio. My voice came out as a dry croak. Central oversight, Station Gamma. Sensor trigger, northern perimeter, Sensor 2 Charlie. Logged as unknown. Visual anomaly noted on camera feed N4. This time, the response was not immediate. 5 seconds of dead air stretched into 10. Then Reed's voice, stripped of all its prior clinical detachment. Sharp and clear. Describe the visual anomaly, Gamma. A shape. Low, pale. It moved along the fence line. It stopped and faced the camera. I heard the tremor in my own words and hated it. Another pause. Did it approach the fence? Did it make contact with the barrier? No. It observed, then departed. The tension on the line seemed to ease by a fraction. Acknowledged. Log it as a class. 1 thermal phantasm. It is a known phenomenon caused by radiated heat from the subsurface geothermal plates interacting with the night-cool clay. The sensors are sensitive. The cameras enhance the effect. You will see these from time to time. They are harmless. Do you understand? It was a perfect textbook explanation. Geothermal heat, a trick of the ion lens. It was the kind of answer designed to placate a rational mind. But I had seen the way it moved. Heat shimmer didn't pivot with predatory awareness. Understood. I lied. Good. Continue your watch. The rest of the night was silent. I didn't sleep. At dawn, bleary-eyed and wired on stale coffee, I prepared for my first perimeter inspection. The console spat out a detailed route map and a checklist. I was to drive a rugged electric buggy along a designated service road that ran inside the fence, visually inspecting the barrier and sensor posts for damage. My eyes kept drifting to the map, to the shaded area marking the eastern quadrant. My route took me along its northern edge, but did not enter it. Stepping outside for the first time in full daylight was a shock. The scale of the basin was even more immense, the silence even deeper. The air was thin, cold, and carried a faint, acrid tang. Ozone and something else, a dry, chalky scent like old bones. I climbed into the buggy and set off. The first few miles were uneventful. The fence was immaculate. The sensor arrays clean and functional. The utter deadness of the ground within the perimeter was unnerving. Not an insect, not a weed, just cracked clay and dust. As I approached the northern boundary of the eastern quadrant, however, the character of the place changed. The fence here was different. The chain link was a thicker, darker metal. The razor wire was a triple coil. The sensor posts were twice as dense and featured additional bulbous devices that hummed with a low, subaudible vibration I felt in my teeth. And there were marks. On the metal of the fence, at roughly 7 to 8 feet high, were long, vertical scorings. Not random scratches from weathering, but parallel gouges, spaced as if made by repeated, testing swipes. I stopped the buggy and got out. Against protocol, walking to within the forbidden 10-foot boundary. I crouched, examining the ground. The hard pan was covered in a fine layer of dust, but pressed into it were impressions. They were elongated, vaguely triangular, about the size of a large dog's paw, but with no clear pad or toe structure. They led right up to the fence line and stopped. A cold knot tightened in my stomach. These weren't the tracks of any desert creature. They spoke of weight and of a gait that distributed pressure in a way I couldn't visualize. I pulled out the small digital camera I brought, snapping several photos. As I did, the feeling of being watched returned, a prickling on the back of my neck. I stood quickly, scanning the empty quadrant. Nothing moved in the stark morning light, but the feeling was absolute. My radio crackled, making me flinch. Station Gamma, this is Central. Why have you stopped your vehicle at grid N7E? They were tracking me. Of course they were. The buggy likely had a transponder. I was conducting a visual inspection of the fence integrity at this sector. The material here seems to be of a different specification. Acknowledged, the eastern quadrant perimeter is reinforced due to higher historical erosion factors. Your inspection is for obvious damage, not materials analysis. Continue your route. The rest of the drive was a tense, paranoid exercise. I completed the loop, returned to the station, and filed my inspection report, omitting the gouges and the tracks. The act of omission felt like my first real step into the secret of this place. That afternoon, I turned my attention to the station itself. It was a vault, but every vault has a crack. In the back of the small storage closet behind crates of spare parts, I found a metal access panel, slightly ajar. Behind was a narrow maintenance shaft, and nestled in the dust within, a single old-fashioned key on a steel ring. It didn't fit any lock in the living quarters or watchroom. My eyes went to the only other door, a heavy sealed door marked Archives, deactivated next to the bathroom. It had a keyhole. The key slid in with a soft, oil click. The door opened onto a small, windowless room. It wasn't an archive. It was Carson's secret office. A small, dusty desk, a cot, and a 2-drawer filing cabinet. The files inside were a ghost history of Blacklock. They weren't the sanitized digital logs, but faded photocopies, handwritten memos, and printouts from a bygone era. I started with an organizational chart from 1986. Blacklock Atmospheric Research Facility. The staff list had 24 names. In the status column, next to 4 names, was a single stark stamp, terminated Section 7. Not transferred. Not resigned. Terminated. I found the incident reports. They were dry, bureaucratic, and horrifying. Dr. Eris Thorne, materials specialist, found deceased in his quarters, 1985. Cause, acute systemic cellular degradation. No further details. Lieutenant Mara Jansen, security detail, disappeared during a routine patrol of the Eastern Quadrant, 1985. Vehicle found idling, door open, sidearm and radio on the seat. No signs of struggle. Presumed victim of environmental misadventure. The most chilling was a memo from the facility director to the Pentagon, dated November 1987. It was a request for immediate, total closure. The subject line, uncontainable non-terrestrial biosignatures and progressive equipment failure. The body was heavily redacted, but one line was clear. The phenomena are not merely observed. They are interactive. They learn. They respond. Continued occupation is unsustainable. The cost in personnel insanity is too high. Scrawled in pen in the margin, in a different hand, was a response. Request denied. Maintain observation. Containment is the only priority. Prepare for full decommissioning and archival in 1988. Non-terrestrial biosignatures. The word seemed to burn on the page. This wasn't a research station. It was a zoo, or a prison, and the inmates had been here long, before 1986. The final document in the cabinet was a personal log, handwritten in a tight, frantic script. Carson's. The entry started normally, whether supply notes, but quickly devolved. Month 4. The night sweeps are getting longer. They don't just follow the fence anymore. They gather at Bunker Epsilon, like they're waiting. Month 7. Saw one today. Clear as day. Mid-afternoon, near the western ridge. It was like watching oil move over water. A slick, pale shape. It saw me. I know it saw me. Reed says it's a heat haze. She's lying. Month 11. They're testing the fence. The new sensors in Quad 7 aren't for erosion. They're monitors. They're trying to understand what's on the other side, or try and keep it from getting out. The last entry was dated 3 days before my arrival. They're not anomalies. They're residents. We're the intruders. The new guy is coming. They'll show him. They show you what they want you to see. God help him. I'm out. I'm finally out. I closed the file, my hands trembling. Carson hadn't been paranoid. He'd been sane in an insane situation. I had been hired not because of my ability to compartmentalize stress, but because of my ability to compartmentalize truth, to see impossible things and still file a report calling them environmental anomalies. That night, armed with Carson's log and a new, simmering dread, my watch changed. I was no longer an auditor. I was a student. When the sensor cascade began in the eastern quadrant at its usual time, I didn't just log it. I studied it. I used the console to triangulate the triggers, mapping vectors, and speed. The pattern wasn't random, but it wasn't simple patrol either. It was a scan, a methodical, grid-based examination of the terrain, centered always on a cluster of bunkers labeled Epsilon, Theta, and Cap on the old facility maps. And then, at 2342, something new, a single sensor, deep in the quadrant, triggered and remained active. Not a ping, but a sustained alert. On the camera, I saw why. At Bunker Epsilon, the heavy door, sealed with welds and warning signs, was now slightly ajar. A sliver of absolute darkness showed at its edge. And from that darkness, something extended, a pale, tender-like appendage, thin and jointless, probing the air. It touched the sun-baked clay, retracted, then extended again. It was testing the outside. For the first time that I watched, my blood turned to ice as the pale appendage performed its delicate, horrifying reconnaissance. It moved with a sinuous, inquisitive grace, tasting the air, pressing against the ground as if measuring its solidity. After a full minute, it withdrew slowly back into the black slit of the bunker entrance, and the door impossibly, without any visible mechanism, eased shut until the seam vanished. The sensor alert ceased. The eastern quadrant fell back into its pattern of sweeping, distant triggers. My mind raced, a cacophony of Carson's words and Reed's dismissals. Their residents. We're the intruders. I didn't report this. Was no phantom. The decision was instinctual. This was intelligence. A survival and it was making first contact with the open air. Reporting it would trigger a response from Central, and I needed to understand before they sanitized the evidence. Instead, I logged it with the same clinical detachment I'd been hired for. 2342, sensor Epsilon 1, sustained trigger. Probable cause, subsurface seismic shift affecting door integrity. Logged as YNVNOM. The lie felt like a shield. The next day, during my perimeter drive, I deviated. The map and the console would show it, but I didn't care. I steered the buggy off the service road and onto the hardpan, driving slowly toward the eastern quadrant. The feeling of transgression was immense, like crossing into a cathedral's inner sanctum. The air grew thicker, the ozone and bone smelled more pronounced. My ears popped subtly, as if from a pressure change. I stopped 100 yards from Bunker Epsilon. Up close, it was a monolithic slab of concrete, its surface stained with strange, iridescent patterns like oil on water. The door was seamless again, but around its edges, the concrete was crazed with fine, hairline fractures. And there, in the dust at the base, were fresh impressions, the same elongated, triangular tracks, but these were deeper and more defined, and they led in a direct line from the door to the fence and back. I was photographing them when the world shifted. Not a sound, but a sensation, a low-frequency vibration that started in the soles of my feet and climbed my spine. The hairs on my arms stood on end, a profound, instinctual terror, the kind that bypasses the brain and speaks directly to the lizard within, told me to run. I looked up from the camera's viewfinder. At the fence line, 30 yards away, a shape had manifested. It was taller than the one I'd seen on the monitor, standing perhaps 7 feet. It was the color of bleached driftwood under a hard moon. Its form was humanoid in only the vaguest sense. A central torso, 2 limbs that might be arms, 2 that might be legs. But the proportions were all wrong, stretched and attenuated. It had no discernible features, just a smooth, ovoid head that seemed to absorb the sunlight rather than reflect it. It didn't move. It simply was a statue of alien stillness. We regarded each other across the dead space. My breath fogged in the suddenly cold air. My every muscle was locked in flight or freeze. This was no curious animal. This was observation of a different order. It was assessing me with a patience that felt geological. My radio, clipped to my vest, exploded with static, then Reed's voice, stripped of all pretense, screamed through the speaker. Asterisk Vance. Asterisk, return to your vehicle immediately. Do not approach. Do not make eye contact. Move slowly backward now. The entity's head tilted, a slight, bird-like angle, as if listening to the tinny voice from my radio. The movement was so utterly, chillingly familiar in its curiosity, I obeyed. I took one slow step back, then another, my eyes locked on the pale form. It did not follow. As I reached the buggy and fumbled for the ignition, it took a single, fluid step forward, closing half the distance between us in a silent, gliding motion. It raised one of its limbs, not in threat, in what looked like a gesture. A single, elongated finger pointed, not at me, but past me toward the main station. Then it swept its limb in a slow, horizontal arc, encompassing the entire basin. The meaning was unmistakable. This place. This is ours. I jammed the buggy into gear and spun around, spraying clay. In the rear-view monitor, I saw it watch me go, then turn and walk, no flow, directly toward Bunker Epsilon. It did not open the door. It seemed to phase through the seam, disappearing into the darkness. Reed was waiting on a live video feed when I stumbled, pale and shaking, back into the watchroom. Her face was a mask of controlled fury. You violated a primary directive. You entered a restricted quadrant. You made a direct visual encounter. Explain. The words tumbled out. It was there. It gestured. It communicated. This isn't containment. Administrator. They're sentient. They're trying to tell us something. What you encountered, she said, each were a chip of ice, is a Class 3 psychotropic manifestation. The combination of geomagnetic stress, isolation, and subliminal frequencies from the old equipment can induce powerful, shared hallucinations. Carson suffered from them. You are now experiencing them. What you saw was not real. The tracks in the clay aren't a hallucination. The door on Bunker Epsilon isn't a hallucination. I was shouting, my compartmentalization failing. The clay cracks in predictable patterns. The bunker doors shift with thermal expansion. You are interpreting mundane phenomena through a lens of psychological contamination. She leaned closer to her camera. Elias, listen to me. Your mind is fabricating a narrative to explain the stress. You must reassert control. The next supply convoy is in 2 weeks. It will include a medical officer for evaluation. Until then, you are confined to Station Gamma. No perimeter drives. Your watch duties are suspended. You will remain indoors and focus on stabilization exercises outlined in your manual. You're grounding me after what's out there. There is nothing out there that the fence and the sensors cannot handle, she stated with absolute, terrifying conviction. The greatest threat to this operation right now is your deteriorating psychological state. Do not force me to enact Chapter 4 protocols. The screen went dark. Chapter 4. I scrambled for the protocol manual. Chapter 4. Loss of operational objectivity. It described procedures for the containment and sedation of a compromised asset pending extraction. I was no longer the warden. I was the problem to be managed. For 2 days, I was a prisoner in the concrete box. I tried the mind-numbing stabilization exercises, pattern recognition games, memory tests. All I could see behind my eyelids was the pale, pointing limb. This place is ours not on the third night. The systems in the watchroom changed. New software was pushed remotely. The sensor map now displayed the eastern quadrant not with green or red dots, but with a pulsing amber overlay. The word quarantine flashed softly over the sector. The direct camera feeds to Bunker Epsilon, and the others were replaced with a scrolling, encrypted data stream. They had cut off my view, but they had forgotten Carson's archive, and they had forgotten human ingenuity born of desperation. Using spare parts from a maintenance kit and a data cable, I managed to patch my personal laptop into a legacy diagnostic port on the console, one not covered by the new software lockout. I couldn't get video, but I could access the raw sensor data. And the raw data was screaming. The entities weren't just moving, they were communicating. The sensors picked up not just motion, but intricate patterns of subsonic vibration, electromagnetic pulses that synchronized across multiple points in the quadrant. It was a conversation, and the focus of that conversation was shifting. The data clusters were migrating, coalescing around a single point. Not Bunker Epsilon, but Bunker Theta, the largest and most deeply buried structure on the old maps. Late that night, as I stared at the waveform scrolling across my laptop, it was the first time it had ever made a sound. My red phone rang. It was not the line to Central. It was the Chapter 4 line. I picked it up. Elias. It was a man's voice, older, weary, and utterly authoritative. This is General Corvin, Blacklock Oversight Command. We're terminating your assignment. The medical evaluation is being accelerated. An extraction team will be at your station in 96 hours. You are to pack your personal effects and prepare for debriefing. General, what's in Bunker Theta? I asked, the question leaving my lips before I could stop it. The silence on the line was different from Reed's. It was heavy, freighted with the weight of decades. That information is not relevant to your extraction, he said, but his tone had changed. The official script was gone. Their focus on it. The censored data shows all their activity converging there. You're not containing them, sir. You're just stewards for something you don't understand, and they're about to take back what's inside. Another long pause. When he spoke again, his voice was low, confidential, as if someone might be listening on his end. Bunker Theta is not a containment unit, son. It's a tomb. It holds the only one of them that ever died on its own. The others, they've been trying to reach it for 30 years. We sealed it in 3 feet of lead-lined concrete and basalt aggregate. We thought that would be enough. He sighed, a sound of profound exhaustion. The extraction team isn't coming just for you. We're initiating final option. Scorched earth. We're going to collapse the entire basin. Bury it under 1,000 feet of rock. Your station has a hardened survival shelter. You'll be safe there until we dig you out in 6 months. My blood ran cold. You're going to bury me alive? To cover this up? To end it, he corrected, but the distinction was meaningless. The beings in that quadrant are a resource we could never harness, a mystery we could never solve. They are also a threat that is becoming proactive. Your encounter proved that. The risk is now unacceptable. The decision has been made. They're not a threat. They were peaceful. The document said non-terrestrial biosignatures. It didn't say hostile. Peaceful things don't make trained military personnel disappear without a trace. Vance. His voice hardened. Prepare for extraction. That is an order. The timeline is irreversible. The line went dead. I was no longer an asset or a problem. I was a piece of collateral, to be stored in a bunker while they committed cosmic murder-suicide from above. I looked at the pulsing data on my laptop, the beautiful, complex language of a species trying to reclaim their dead. I looked at the red phone, the instrument of my entombment, and I made my decision. I would not be buried, and neither would they. The general's words echoed in the sterile silence. Scorched earth, a tomb. They weren't just covering up a failed experiment. They were preparing a mass grave. The beings in the quadrant weren't hostile invaders. They were mourners, and we were the grave robbers who now planned to dynamite the cemetery. My confinement to the station was a death sentence with a 6-month delay. I had 96 hours. But the entities, it seemed, were on their own schedule. That night, the raw sensor data on my laptop screen erupted. The orderly patterns of communication shattered into frantic, cascading spikes. The focus on Bunker Theta wasn't just sustained, it was frenzied. Something had changed. They knew. A pressure drop before the storm, a seismic whisper. Some sensory lack had told him the end was coming. Reed's attempt to contact me over the main radio became increasingly strained. Vance, acknowledge. Your biometrics show elevated stress. Report your status. I ignored her. I was done reporting. I spent hours studying the old facility blueprints from Carson's archive. Bunker Theta was a fortress, sublevel storage, accessed by a single elevator shaft and a primary blast door. But every fortress has its weaknesses. The blueprints showed an emergency ventilation system, a network of narrow ducts for air exchange. leading to surface vents scattered around the basin. One such vent was located just outside the eastern quadrant fence, a half-mile from my station. According to a faded maintenance note, it had been sealed with a welded grate in 1987. My plan was insanity, but so was sitting in a concrete coffin waiting for the sky to fall. I would reach that vent, bypass the weld, and descend into Bunker Theta. My goal wasn't to fight or to steal. It was to open the tomb, to give them back their dead before the bulldozers of heaven buried it forever. On the second night, with 72 hours left, I made my move. I packed a small bag, bolt cutters, a laser cutter from the maintenance locker, climbing gear, a powerful flashlight, and Carson's handwritten log. I waited until the scheduled system diagnostic, a 2-minute window when external surveillance would be momentarily preoccupied with internal checks. Then I slipped out the station's emergency exit, a heavy door that opened onto the blind side of the building, away from the main camera arcs. The desert night was frigid. The stars a brilliant, cold smear across the void. I moved quickly, keeping to the shadows of the station, and then striking out across the open basin toward the vent's marked location. The feeling of exposure was total. Every crunch of gravel under my boot sounded like a thunderclap. I expected a spotlight, a shouted command from Central, but none came. They thought I was locked inside, a docile asset awaiting collection. I found the vent exactly what maps indicated. A low, metal housing nearly buried in drifted clay. The welded grate was old but stout. The laser cutter whined as it bit into steel, painting the night with a tiny, blinding star of light. It took 20 minutes of agonizing, exposed work to cut through. I pulled the grate free, revealing a vertical shaft descending into absolute darkness. A rusted ladder was bolted to one side. I took a breath, thinking of Lila, hoping I might one day explain this to her, and began to climb down. The shaft descended for what felt like forever, the circle of night sky shrinking to a coin above me. The air grew colder, thick with the smell of stale metal and that pervasive ozone bone scent, now so strong it was almost a taste. After a climb of nearly 100 feet, my boot hit solid ground, a narrow horizontal duct, just large enough to crawl through. Stretched ahead, I inched forward. The walls scraping my shoulders, I emerged into a cavernous space. Bunker Theta. My flashlight beam cut through a darkness, so complete it felt solid. I was in a vast, circular chamber. The walls were smooth, poured concrete. In the center of the room, illuminated by a single, faltering emergency light embedded high in the ceiling, was a structure. It was not a cage or a lab table. It was a dais, a hexagonal platform of polished black stone that seemed to drink the light, and resting upon it was a crystalline capsule, clear as water. Inside, suspended in a faintly glowing fluid, was a form. My breath caught. It was smaller than the entities I'd seen, more finely wrought. Its limbs were elegant. Its smooth, featureless head held in a posture that suggested repose, not death. It was beautiful in an utterly alien way. Colors seemed to shift and swim within its pale substance, like the northern lights captured under glass. This was no specimen jar. This was a sarcophagus. We hadn't dissected it. We had enshrined it. The ultimate paradox, respecting the artifact while imprisoning its kin. A deep, resonant hum filled the chamber, vibrating in my chest. I whirled, my light sweeping the walls. From the shadows of a large service entrance on the far side of the room, the main sealed door, a pale light grew. One by one they entered. There were perhaps a dozen of them. They moved into the chamber with silent, solemn grace, forming a wide circle around the dais. They ignored me completely. Their attention was fixed on a capsule. The hum wasn't from machinery. It was coming from them, a harmonized vibration that made the air thrum. The largest of them, the one I had seen at the fence, stepped forward. It approached the dais and extended a limb, not touching the crystal, but hovering just above it. The shifting colors within the capsule brightened, swirling in response. This was a ritual, a farewell, or a preparation. I stepped from the duct mouth, my movement clumsy and loud in the sacred space. Every head in the circle turned toward me in perfect unison. The hum ceased. The silence was deafening. I held up my empty hands. I'm not here to stop you. My voice was a rasp. They're coming. The people who put it here. They're going to destroy this place. Bury it. They're going to bury her. I gestured to the capsule. The large entity regarded me. It then made a series of gestures with its limbs, fluid, complex shapes in the air. At first, I thought it was meaningless, but then a pattern emerged. It pointed to me, to the capsule, to the ceiling, and then made a crushing motion with its hands. It was recounting my own explanation. It understood. It stepped closer. I fought the urge to recoil. It stopped an arm's length away and slowly raised a single, elongated digit. Before I could react, it touched my forehead. A jolt, not of pain, but of information. A cascade of images, emotions, concepts flooded my mind, bypassing language. I saw their vessel, a sleek seed of light, falling gracefully from the stars, not crashing. A deliberate landing. I saw the first contact, human soldiers fearful, pointing weapons. I felt their conscious decision, non-resistance. Capture was preferable to violence. I saw the years of isolation, the attempts at communication met with fear and needles and scans. I felt the profound sorrow of the one in the capsule, not from injury, but from a slow, grieving extinction of hope. It had chosen to cease its functions, to die, and I felt the relentless, decades-long vigil of the others, trapped outside the fence, singing to their lost companion through stone and steel, waiting for a chance to bring her home. The touch broke. I staggered, tears cutting tracks through the dust on my face. The grief was not mine, but I wore its shape. I'm sorry, I whispered, the words hopelessly inadequate. The entity gestured again, this time toward the capsule, then toward the main door. A request. They could not move it. The capsule was integrated with the dais, with systems that had been designed to be permanent. But I had the laser cutter. I could free it. I didn't hesitate. I climbed onto the dais. The crystal was cool to the touch. At its base, a thick collar of metal fused it to the stone. I aimed the cutter. The laser flared, a violent, orange scar against a serene chamber. The entities watched, their silent song now a tense, waiting vibration. It took minutes that felt like hours. With a final, shrieking pop, the seal broke. I carefully wrestled the heavy capsule, feeling the fluid slosh inside, and tipped it off the dais. The large entity was there instantly, catching it with impossible gentleness, cradling it against its chest. The colors within flared brilliantly, casting the chamber in swimming light. A deafening alarm ripped through the bunker. Klaxons I hadn't seen began to flash red. A robotic voice boomed. Containment breach. Theta protocol initiated. Detonation sequence engaged. Central had been monitoring the bunker's integrity. I had triggered the failsafe. The general's scorched earth wasn't in 96 hours. It was now. The entity holding the capsule looked at me, then at the ceiling. It gestured urgently toward the duct I'd entered from. Go. What about you? It pointed to the massive main door, now grinding open on protesting hydraulics, revealing the tunnel beyond that led back into their quadrant. They had their own path. We ran in opposite directions. They toward their home, and I toward the desperate climb to a surface that was about to become a hellscape. I scrambled back into the duct, climbing the ladder with a speed born of pure terror. Behind and below me, I heard a series of deep, concussive thumps as shaped charges began to collapse the bunker's support structures. Dust rained down the shaft. I reached the surface just as the first true explosion rocked the ground, throwing me onto my back. The night was no longer still. From the eastern quadrant, geysers of fire and earth erupted as the demolition sequence raced through the bunker network. The world was coming apart, and through the chaos, I saw them, a procession of pale figures, moving with calm purpose through the raining debris, the large one leading, the crystal capsule held aloft like a holy relic. They reached their section of the fence, and they did not climb. They walked through it. The solid metal links parted like a curtain of water, rippling around them, re-solidifying after they passed. They moved into the foothills and were gone, swallowed by the night and the smoke. I ran, stumbling, falling toward Station Gamma. The ground buckled. A fissure opened up, swallowing one of the derelict structures whole. I reached the station door as a final, cataclysmic explosion from the heart of the quadrant lit the world in a blinding white fury. The shock wave hit me like a physical wall, throwing me inside. I lay on the cold floor, ears ringing as the ceiling rained dust. Then silence, a profound, absolute silence, deeper than any that had come before. The rumbling ceased. The alarms died. I crawled to watchroom. Every monitor was static. The sensor map was blank. The radio emitted only a hollow hiss. The red phone was dead. They had done it. They had burned the evidence and buried the truth under 1,000 feet of shattered rock. But they had failed. I was not in the survival shelter. I was alive. And they were gone, finally free, carrying their lost one back to the stars from which they came. The silence you hear now is the same silence that followed me for days, weeks, then months in Station Gamma. The supply convoy never came. The extraction team never arrived. I was presumed lost in the catastrophic, naturally triggered seismic event that the news reports later described. I eventually walked out of that basin, a ghost with a story no one would ever believe, etched into my mind by a touch that was not human. We look at the stars and wonder if we are alone, craving contact, dreaming of discovery. But my story asks a darker, more necessary question. What if contact already happened? And what if we failed the test? We imprisoned explorers. We martyred the peaceful. And when their kin came to mourn, we called them monsters and built fences to keep them out. The greatest mystery isn't in some distant nebula. It's buried in the classified archives of our own past, in the Blacklocks and the Sector Gammas scattered across forgotten maps. This isn't just a story about what I found in the desert. It's a warning about the stories we tell ourselves to sleep at night. The official story is always a clean, well-lit room. But the truth often lives in the dark, in the silence between the lines, in the feeling you get when you walk into an empty place and know, deep in your bones, that you are not welcome. If this journey into shadow of first contact has held you, if it has made that silence feel a little heavier, a little more full of possibility, then you understand the mission of this channel. We are not here for easy answers. We are here for the questions that keep you awake. We are here to give voice to the stories whispered by the wind in empty places. So, if you want winds of thought to keep blowing through the forgotten corridors and sealed archives of our world, to bring you more tales that live in the unsettling space between fact and fear, your support is everything. It tells the algorithm that there is an audience for depth, for mystery, for truth that comes in the shape of a warning. Please, take a second right now to hit the like button. It fuels this channel more than you know. And if you haven't already, subscribe to Winds of Thought and tap the notification bell. You won't want to miss where we go next, because the next story is already waiting, buried just beneath the surface of the ordinary, and it is more terrifying and more true than you can possibly imagine. Thank you for listening. And remember, the next time you feel that uncanny chill, that sense of not being alone in an empty room, pay attention. You might be in the presence of a history that is not yet done with you.